Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. And the topic of the day, you don't need me to tell you, actually a very interesting schedule drop from the SEC in football for 2024, okay? So for people who live and breathe this stuff, about 6-7 months ago, the SEC kind of put out who would play who in terms of opponents in 2024, the next football season. Remember, Texas and Oklahoma are coming. Divisions are gone. Well, on Wednesday, we got the actual schedules. This team plays this team on this day. So there's a lot to dive into. Georgia plays at Bama. Bama plays at Oklahoma. So much to get into. I have 5 big picture takeaways that I want to discuss. We're not going team by team. I apologize. If you want the Auburn game-by-game schedule breakdown, there's a great place for that. I'm not sure this is it, but I do have 5 big picture takeaways. Let's get to big picture takeaway number 1. Number 1 is this, and it's really number 1 and number 2. Going away from divisions really helps and really hurts certain teams, okay? So let's dive in, because when it was announced that Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the SEC, obviously we got excited about the 2 new brands in the conference. But the question then became, what does the schedule look like? Do we play 8 or 9 league games? Do we stick with divisions? Do teams move to a different division? Do we go to 4-team pods? Well, what we ended up settling on was 8 league games, 3 rivals stay intact, but then beyond that, and this is the important part, divisions are gone. And so all those teams that were in the SEC West that had to play Bama and LSU and A&M when they're good and Ole Miss when they're good, now you don't really have to. On the flip side, all those teams that benefited from playing Vanderbilt when they were down every year, South Carolina when they haven't been very good, now, all of a sudden, that is gone away as well. And so takeaway number 1, I don't think there is a bigger loser in the new era of SEC football than the Georgia Bulldogs. And to be clear, for a Georgia fan watching, it doesn't mean that I think your team stinks. They're going to start in the preseason top 5. But when you look at that schedule for 2024, it ain't easy, okay? So first of all, they keep the 3 historic rivals. They will play Tennessee. That game will be at home. They'll play Auburn at home. And then they will play Florida on a neutral. So those 3 rivals, by no means are they the most difficult rivals you could have, but they are not very easy either. Where it gets interesting to me is as follows. It is that Vanderbilt off the schedule. South Carolina, who was not good this year, off the schedule. If there was an SEC East next year, I think those 2 teams would probably be picked to finish 6th and 7th in the SEC West. Those teams are gone. You know who you replaced them with? At Alabama. By the way, early September. So a Georgia team that did not play a ranked team until late October, early November this year. I think Kentucky may have been ranked, but the toughest game that they played really was probably Ole Miss or Missouri, and that wasn't until late October. Now you have to play Bama by the end of September at Bama. They also have at Ole Miss, which I think will be a preseason probably top 15 team if Jackson Dart returns. So you replaced Vandy and South Carolina at Bama, at Ole Miss, and then, oh, by the way, remember this. You're going to get either Texas or Oklahoma next year. You're getting at Texas. So a team whose toughest road game this past year was at Tennessee. End of the year, Tennessee wasn't very good by that point. They now have at Bama, at Texas next year. And oh, by the way, they also have Clemson in the out of conference. So all of a sudden, that schedule just got so much tougher. No Vandy, no South Carolina, at Texas, at Bama, at Ole Miss, and Clemson to open the season. That is a brutal schedule. Georgia is still great. We think Carson Beck is coming back. Not sitting here saying they're going 3-9. But that schedule just got so much tougher without divisions. And I think they were really the big loser. Now, we're going to talk about Florida in a minute because Florida was a pretty big loser too. But I would say they are the biggest loser. What's interesting is just the way the schedules broke, you can't say that every team from the SEC East ended up being a big loser. I thought it was interesting. Kentucky's schedule, as an example, Kentucky's schedule largely stayed the same. They only have two kind of quote unquote SEC West teams on the schedule next year, Auburn and at Ole Miss. Now they do have at Texas because everybody has at Texas, but they also have most of these same SEC East teams that they would have had this past season. So you look at their schedule. Here is the schedule for Kentucky. They still have South Carolina and they have Georgia. Now, obviously, you don't want Georgia, but they do keep Vanderbilt. They actually keep Tennessee in a game at Tennessee. And so you look at it, it's largely the same. South Carolina, not very good. I know Kentucky has lost to them the last 2 years, but I like Kentucky with Brock Vandagriff going into that game. Vanderbilt, you keep Vandy on the schedule. That's a win. Now, you do have to go to Texas, to Ole Miss. It's not easy, but I think Georgia's the biggest loser when you start talking about teams as divisions go away. Now, the biggest winner, I think it's a lot of those SEC West schools that don't all have to play each other. Now, look at a Texas A&M, for example. Texas A&M's schedule is by no means easy. That's not what I'm saying. But you look at it, it ain't hard as it could be either. You know why? You know who's not on Texas A&M's schedule next year? Alabama. No Alabama for Texas A&M. Win for Texas A&M. No more Ole Miss, a team that has given you fits and does not. Lane Kiffin loves nothing more than poking the bear that is A&M. I think he liked poking Jimbo Fisher more than anything. So now that Jimbo's gone, you avoid Lane Kiffin and avoid Ole Miss. Now you do have at Florida. You do have some other tough games. You still play Texas late in the year, and you talk about a game that is as much of a must-watch game as you can possibly imagine. Final weekend of the season, Texas A&M hosting Texas. It's unbelievable. But I thought I thought A&M really benefited about as much as you can. You still have LSU, but no Georgia, no Tennessee from the East, and no Alabama and no Ole Miss from the West. I know it's early to start talking over-unders, but that's an A&M team, and I know we say it every year, but they're going to be better coached. They're going to be better disciplined. I think they can make a big leap from the 7-5 that they were this year. By the way, you know who had the single biggest break with this schedule? It's Bama. So Bama, think about Bama. Couple things. One, somehow, I don't know how all this works, and I don't know how the schedules all come together. Now, look, I will say this for Bama, their 2024 schedule. They do still obviously have the 3 rivalry games, which Nick Saban whined about last summer, but that's neither here nor there. They do still have Tennessee, which is a road game next year, LSU, which is a road game next year, and also on top of that, Auburn at home. Auburn, of course, gave them fits this year. But I find it interesting. And by the way, the schedule is still tough because they still have Georgia at home, and their second to last game of the season before the Iron Bowl is at Oklahoma. So I'm not sitting here saying Bama has it easy, but with the divisions broken up, check this out. No A&M, which I think will be better. And say what you want about A&M. They have given Bama trouble through the years. This year was a 6-point, I think it was a 26-20 game, something like that. Last year came down the final play of the game. Year before they beat Bama. So you know you don't have A&M with a new head coach who actually might know what he's doing. On top of that, you don't have Ole Miss, which again is a program trending up. But here's where I think it's interesting. How about this? At Vandy, South Carolina at home, and Missouri at home. Now, I know Missouri's coming off a 10-win season, but I just bring it up to say that schedule breaks nicely. You trade Ole Miss and you trade A&M for Vandy and South Carolina. Doesn't get much better than that. Really like how the schedule breaks for Bama as much as it possibly can when you have Georgia and at Oklahoma on the schedule. Let's keep it going because I do think outside of the divisional stuff, maybe the biggest takeaway. Billy Napier's kind of screwed at Florida. Okay. And so listen, I feel like I've been very negative with Billy Napier lately. Lost his best offensive player to the portal, Trevor Etienne, not Travis Etienne, who's in the league. Beyond that, I just, his recruiting class is kind of sort of falling apart. I don't think he's a very good coach. I think he gets embarrassed. But what I would say is the SEC in 2024 did him no favors. And beyond that, his own school really did him no favors. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, from the SEC perspective, they do keep those three historic rivals: LSU, Tennessee, which is a road game next year, and Georgia on a neutral. So you get Georgia, you get LSU. Not ideal. They also get at Texas, not ideal. A&M at home. Maybe that one's okay. We'll see what happens. Why do I bring it up? It is because you know who actually screwed Florida more than anybody? It's their own administration, okay? So here is Florida's out of conference schedule. On top of an 8-game SEC schedule that includes Georgia on a neutral, LSU at home, A&M at home, who was the big road game? Texas on the road. It's tough. Ole Miss on the road, by the way, as well. Here is Florida's out of conference schedule. Miami at home to open the season. I think they'll be improved. Mario Cristobal is really improving the talent level in that program. They play Central Florida, UCF. Don't call them Central Florida. Central Florida fans get mad. They're UCF, but they're a Big 12 school now. Gus Malzahn, they got dudes. And they wrap with at Florida State. And so on top of an 8-game SEC schedule, Florida plays 3 Power 5 teams out of conference. And I'm just here to say, I don't get it. I thought Nick Roush, my buddy from Kentucky Sports Radio, he actually wrote a great article on Thursday morning talking about this, okay? Kentucky has been kind of criticized for playing a light out of conference schedule. And his point was, in the new SEC with no divisions, there's no reason to schedule big out of conference games. Now, if you have a rival, Florida, Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky, who else? South Carolina, Clemson, then okay, play the game. You don't want to buck history, okay? But at the same time, 3 Power 5 out of conference games. And by the way, there's no benefit for Florida, right? Miami kind of needs that schedule boost, the credibility, beat the SEC team. But if Miami goes into the swamp and wins, then all of a sudden it's Billy Napier's a mess. Come here. You don't want to play there. They're falling apart. And obviously Central Florida, UCF, it's the same exact thing. There's no benefit at all. And so listen, I love big out of conference games. I hope we get 1 million of them. We got Georgia Clemson next year. We got, by the way, Texas at Michigan in week 2. Okay, sign me up. But while I give these schools credit, I don't know if it's actually smart anymore. Again, keep your rival. Play one big game. But it's just not worth it when the schedule is going to be as tough as it is. And so you look at Billy Napier. Look at the schedule for Florida. Billy Napier, I don't think he was going to survive anyway. But when you actually see the schedule on paper, look at this schedule. I'm just going to read it to you really quick. Miami at home to open the year. A&M in week 3. At Mississippi State, Central Florida, at Tennessee, all before the middle of October. That's potentially 3 ranked teams and 5 Power 5 teams before the middle of October. 5 Power 5 teams. You play Samford in week 2. The last 10 games of the schedule are against Power 5 teams, and that's after playing Miami. So we'll do a separate thing on Billy Napier next week because the signing day is coming, and I would argue Florida, nobody needs to close on signing day like Florida does. But man, oh man, oh man, this is just bad news. Couple other notes before we get out of here. One, I think Texas at Oklahoma, it's just cool to have them in the league. I don't think there's any amazing takeaway other than this. One, Oklahoma's got a brutal schedule, but you know, it's the SEC. Like, I don't think there's like, oh my God, like, I don't think it's crazy by anything other than SEC standards. Worth noting with Oklahoma, besides playing Texas in Dallas, final 2 weeks of the season, Bama at home, LSU on the road. Good luck with that. But how about Texas? Because think about Texas. Texas might be a preseason top 5 team. If first of all, they could win the national championship. But if Quinn Ewers comes back, a lot of guys on defense, a lot of guys on that O-line, Texas might be the number 1 team in the country coming into next year, okay? So I bring it up solely to say this. Look at this schedule. At Michigan in the out-of-conference. Georgia at home. Oklahoma on a neutral. Now you avoid Bama, which is nice. But here's the crazy part. This is after playing at Michigan, Georgia at home, Oklahoma on a neutral. Final 3 games includes at Arkansas, at Texas A&M. Now, look, Arkansas is struggling, and we're going to wrap on Arkansas here momentarily. But A&M as well, we'll see what they are in year one under Mike Elko. I just bring it up because you want to talk about two of the craziest, most raucous environments that anyone will play in anywhere in college football next year. At Arkansas, at A&M, two rivals that hate your guts. Those are two games I can't wait for. Finally, lastly, let me say this. You want to know what was actually the number one takeaway that I had from the schedule release? Arkansas schedule. Of all the teams, this was my biggest takeaway, okay? Because look at Arkansas's 2024 schedule. Now, it's not by technical definition brutal early, but in the out of conference, they play at Oklahoma State. Then they play at Auburn. Remember, Auburn destroyed Arkansas this year in Fayetteville. Texas A&M on a neutral. Texas A&M destroyed Arkansas this year on a neutral. Tennessee by LSU in the middle of October. Why do I bring it up? First, they play 5 games before the end of September, okay? The 3 toughest ones, none of them are in the state of Arkansas. So I'm not saying it's going to happen. But I think there's a scenario by the middle of October, Sam Pittman could be out, and we could be looking at interim head coach at Arkansas, Bobby Petrino. I'm being dead serious. At Oklahoma State, at Auburn, A&M at home. If you are on a neutral, in Dallas, you lose those 3, it's hard to argue that you are going to have the kind of year where Sam Pittman deserves another year when most people don't think that he deserved another year this season. So if they start 2-3, maybe even lose to Tennessee at home, I'll tell you this, if they start 2-3 and then lose to Tennessee at home, Sam Pittman's getting fired going into the bye. And I don't root for people to get fired. I'm just being real here. But could Bobby Petrino be the interim? Now, a lot of Arkansas fans would say that Travis Williams, the defensive coordinator, kind of a young up-and-coming guy, defense was really good, that he'd probably get the opportunity before Bobby Petrino. And I don't think if you're Hunter Yurachek, the AD, you're really that excited to let Bobby Petrino be the interim head coach because, God forbid, he wins some games, and then you got to hire him as a 62, 63-year-old guy. But could you imagine that? By the way, I was in Fayetteville the day Petrino was officially hired, and the day he made that debut at the Duke basketball game. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I don't think I realized how much Arkansas fans love Bobby Petrino. Absolutely insane, but I don't think it's out of the question. By the way, for people who don't follow, Bobby Petrino